All right. Why don't we go ahead and get started with the rest of this afternoon's events? And I don't want to stand in the way of our next speaker. You heard Tom Finger talk about some of the things that they're doing and referred to Dale Meyerrose and some of the things he's doing. And he is doing a tremendous amount of work on this that adds and expands analytic transformation. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce the D&I CIO, Dale Meyerrose.
Well, thank you very much. I feel like I've been set up if you've been here most of the day. Around Washington, D.C., they say that the number of times that somebody's name's mentioned in conversation is an indication of how influential they are. My name's Dale Meyerrose, and I'm happy to be here today. And I really thank Tom What's-His-Name and Mike, whoever it is, for inviting me along. It is indeed my pleasure to be here. It's my pleasure to be outside of Washington, D.C. and enjoying the friendly, windy city and the good weather. And also seeing lots of longtime friends. When you reach my age, the word old kind of escapes your vocabulary. So, again, it's good to see so many folks here. And it's good to see the 15 of you who work for me who are the designated clappers for when I finish speaking. Not yet, guys. I forgot to introduce, my name's Dale Meyerrose, and I'm happy to be here. I found a lot of the discussion, the questions and answers, the dialogue very interesting today. And some of the questions, got deferred to me just because Tom What's-His-Name didn't want to answer them. And I guess that's okay. But I really expected better out of Mike Huzitz. I thought he would surely answer some more of those questions. But I'll make a good effort at trying to tie some things together. Again, talking about some of the things we've been talking about, but maybe in a different light. I found the question earlier this morning that said, "What are you doing for a strategic plan?" to be an interesting proposition, and I also found Tom What's-His-Name's answer very interesting too. I think that by and large, we're not molded and shaped by any of our strategic plans or intent. By and large, we are molded and shaped by disruptions in our society or in our community. It's not the planned event that rules the day. Think of all of the disruptions in our lifetime. A couple of them have anniversaries of today. 1972, Munich. On this day, terrorists took over a portion of the Israeli Olympic team. And for many of us, that was our first exposure to extremist behavior, tactics, and what folks were willing to do. On this day in 1975, there was an assassination attempt on our president in Sacramento, California. Jerry Ford was the president, and Squeaky Fromm was the attempted assassin. And then 17 days later, there was another attempt made on his life, and by and large has set the stage for how we protect senior leaders and such. And I would submit to you that much of what we do is not on the program path, not what the reasonable person would accept or expect to have happen as a consequence. In some regards, I don't find a lot of utility in having plans of a long-term nature. The act of planning is something that world-class organizations do. But that horizon is very, very important. Because a horizon picked too far in the future never materializes and never really molds and shapes your organization. And plans too close means that seldom do you aggregate the right factors and ensure that you're headed in the right direction. My name's Dale Meyerrose, and I'm happy to be with you today. Okay, you get a good fit rep. We'll go on. We've heard a lot about A-Space. With a little bit of literary license, let me give you my version about how A-Space came about. Long about a year and a half ago, Tom Watsy's name came to my office and said, we're going to create an A-LAN. And I thought, boy, that's a bad idea. So I went to Mike Huzitz and I said, we got to tell Tom Watsitz we don't want an A-LAN. That's the wrong perspective. So Mike Watsitz comes back to me a little bit later and says, all right, we need an A-net. Okay, well, I thought about it for a while. Said, no, I think we can do better. And so his guys and mine guys and some other guys and gals got together and came up with A-Space. And you remember the law enforcement officials said, you know, if it doesn't look right, well, the first two didn't look right, but the third one did. But think about it just for a minute. From the inception, we need an A-LAN, we need an A-net, we need an A-Space. In essence, the problem never changed. The parameters, the challenges, all of those things associated with what we needed to do didn't change. But what changed? What are the paradigms associated with a LAN versus what are the paradigms and thought processes associated with the net, and what are the paradigms and processes associated with space? And in a very short period of time, I think we reoriented ourselves into a fashion which would make what we do more relevant to the business of intelligence. And so the lingo that you hear us talking about with A-Space sounds all modern. You know, Wikipedias and blogs and all those kinds of things. Well, I got to tell you, I believe that that is so 2006. And while I'm not going to propose to Tom Huzitz and Mike Watsitz to change the name, we need to continually remake ourselves in the idea of what is the possible, the probable, and the doable. And maybe as we flesh out the business of A-Space, we need to be thinking in terms of what's the next set of paradigms which will control our thinking. Is it A-presence? Is it A-mash? But in this business, if we don't continually remake ourselves with the idea of what the possible, the probable, and the doable is, we will always find ourselves in the business of delivering something 4 years late that's 7 years old. And as we think about what A-Space is and should be, and again, there are folks more eloquent than I already talk about that, I think there's a couple things that we ought to bear in mind. One is what's the goal? I believe that the goal is to make IT invisible to the analyst. that the analyst spends more time analyzing and doing the tradecraft of analysis and intelligence than the scratching the head craft of how does this thing work and why can't I get it to do this? Boy, we got them all worked up next door, don't we? I didn't know I was that powerful. My name's Dale Meyerrose, and I'm happy to be here. So for the early part of this year, I spent a good time analyzing how do we do this business of collaboration? And what can I learn from what we do and what we know can be possible that might help us as we think about AMASH? One of the first lessons you learn is one that may not have been obvious to everybody here. But the business of collaboration takes a spark, and you had a spark speak to you earlier this morning in Claudine Road. And the passion she had for ensuring that her virtual family was connected, productive, informed, relevant, involved, and ever expanding. A lot of what I believe we do in collaboration in the business of intelligence today is formed by a man that I won't tell you where he works or what organization he works for, but his handle is Collab Man. And we've studied this guy. And we've studied how many tools does he use. And the answer you can find on one hand. They're not the most complicated and sophisticated tools that we have in our inventory. Matter of fact, we have thousands of those kinds of tools, for which the user population for most of them you can almost count on one hand. Collab Man uses the tools that are intuitive and is usable by the broadest possible audience in his domain. Most of the collaboration that he does is set up by pre-associations. And again, you heard a story this morning that reinforced that, as Claudine talked about how she established those pre-associations before collaboration took place. The next thing I learned about how we actually collaborate today is that on an event-based, time-dominant collaboration, there are 20 times more observers, listeners, and readers than there are participants in the collaboration sessions. And then they tree off. The 95% that are observers in one collaboration environment then turn around and become the 5% in related collaboration sessions. And so the power of collaboration seen in those eyes is pretty tremendous. I read a book a long time ago. The name of the author escapes me, but the title was Information is Power. And the author puts forth the proposition of naming the 100 most powerful people in the history of mankind. And the first 5 of these you would recognize very quickly. All debatable, but I'll get to the point about information here in a minute. For your curiosity, number 1 was Muhammad, number 2 was Jesus, number 3 was Buddha. Number 4 was Confucius. Number 5 was St. Peter. But number 6 was really curious. The sixth most powerful man in the history of mankind, according to this author, was Zai Lun. Zai Lun in 3000 BC invented paper. And the seventh most powerful man, according to this author, was Gutenberg. And the point is that all 92 rest of the people on the list of the most 100 powerful people in the history of mankind all came after movable type. We need to study how we collaborate, because collaboration is power. And everything that we've got that shows how we do that is in my mind, proof positive. And we need to think about that in terms of what A-Space is going to be in the future. Is A-Space going to connect to other things in the community? The answer is absolutely yes. Whether it's the tools, whether it's the standards for metadata and data, processes, all have to be found in A-Space. Otherwise, the IT becomes very visible to the analyst, and sometimes dominating the analyst's time from the more important element of the analyst's tradecraft. A couple other things I think we need to bear in mind as we look towards the future of AMASH. By the way, my name's Dale Meyerrose. I just copyrighted that term AMASH. Our work has shifted. How we do our work has shifted. Our work no longer takes place in SCIFs and solely at workstations. And so the concept about what A-Space needs to do, what the Library of National Intelligence needs to do, and how it follows us, and how we leverage it, and how we use it, has got to change. Because the work of intelligence is varied, it is far-reaching, and it has many demands. So we need to have more than just the frame of mind which says that we think in terms of collaboration as it pertains to a workstation, or as it pertains to someone sitting on a desk, at a desk, in a SCIF. Another thing that we need to consider as we talk through the elements of collaboration: not all intelligence is collected. Now, there may be some collectors out there that may want to tell you that all intelligence collected is done by collectors. But the business of collection intelligence happens in many ways and many forms. As many of our young analysts will tell you, that unclassified open sources and all those kinds of things provide lots of context and intelligence that is important to how they do their job. Not only that, but you heard examples this morning of first responders who create intelligence by virtue of doing their job. Operations creates intelligence that we need to know about. I would further say that the business of collaboration creates intelligence. So as we think about our workspace and how we want to make it interactive within our business, I submit that we ought to consider all of those things in thinking about the future and keeping ourselves relevant. We've talked a lot about the Library of National Intelligence. I can remember a year ago telling Mike that I hate that analogy. I hate calling it a library. The paradigms are wrong. It's not expansive enough. I grudgingly admit there is wisdom in going ahead and calling it the Library of National Intelligence. But let's be mindful of where the paradigms break down. And as we think about the future of the Library of National Intelligence in a very broad context, I submit that we ought to keep the following in mind. I believe the purpose of the library is very, very simple. Make all intelligence discoverable. What a powerful thing that would be. Now, see, I'm differentiating between discovering something, having access to something, and that's a discipline that I think that we need to work on, because I find that not just splitting hairs, but a very useful, pragmatic way to go about solving the complexities associated with intelligence, or is it complicated? I forget, one of those two. To make all intelligence discoverable. All right, now, again, we've talked about the early efforts of the library to be that of finished product. I think that's way too limiting. Where did I say we had sources of intelligence out there lying that don't qualify as finished product? All over the place. And so the LNI ends up needing to be a federated discovery layer, search capability that ferrets out. I didn't mean it, really. The Library of National Intelligence needs to be that federated layer that searches out intelligence irrespective of source. And the nature of a library, again, conjures up the idea that I'm going to go to a building, I'm going to go to a card catalog, I'm going to discover what the NSN of the book or the author that I'm hunting for, I'm going to go back to a bunch of stacks, I'm going to pull out a book, I'm going to go to a librarian, he or she's going to check it out for me, and I'm going to walk out the door. And the book that I walk out the door underneath my arm is no longer available to anybody else who visits the library to check out. When in fact, in the Library of National Intelligence, every time a document is checked out, that document's still in its original place to be used, and now it's in a new place. And every time that document is used as a source document or a draft document or some other basis for doing some other intelligence work, it continues to multiply itself around the community. To where if you happen to be an analyst and come across 4 sightings of the same information, are those 4 independent sightings of 4 independent observations, or is that 4 replications of 1 sighting? And to analysts, that makes a difference. And so the pedigree that we need to add to our data and our discovery capability is huge, and much more expansive than what our initial efforts are with the Library of National Intelligence. But we've got to get started. We've got to start somewhere. And therefore, I found wisdom in Mike's approach for getting us started in the Library of National Intelligence. But we have a concept that it's going to take us months to produce the elements of the library. And I think we need to cut that down by a lot in terms of standards that eliminate options and make things more applicable to a wider number of folks. As most of you know, I work very hard at learning lessons from business. There was a question this morning about software or IT acquisition, development, being shut out of markets, all those kinds of things. I think many of the policy speakers in front of me talked about open standards, and we're very serious about that. But let me give you my framework for how fast we ought to go in some of this business. The best models, most complete, well thought out of world-class IT corporations. Procurement of software looks like this. Let's say I make a procurement or decide I need to make a procurement of something that's going to have a 3-year shelf life. The best practice models are out there that the company goes through concept, prototype, testing, fielding, and training in 75 days. "75 days. And that the business case for much of the software they buy has a payback period of 180 days. And then for the rest of the 2.5 years is the useful life of that software until it's replaced. How does that match up with our concept of bringing new technology into our business? You know, the elements that say that it takes us 6 months to state the problem and figure out the as-is and all those kinds of things, I don't think is relevant. And I would submit that we need to help encourage those who support us to understand on how to help us change the business model. We already have thousands of tools, and thousands more is that proverbial hay that Tom talked about earlier this morning. World-class companies, corporations, global Fortune 500, rely on enterprise services, a defined set of enterprise services available to every individual in the corporation. And I also find it interesting that most of the companies in the global Fortune 500 that I've had the opportunity to spend extensive time with some of their leadership, they use collaboration in the business of coming up with their IT solutions. So if we were to apply those things to what we do, what are some of the underlying lessons? The underlying lesson, I think, is that we need to solve community issues on a community-wide basis more and more, and less on an agency-by-agency basis. Otherwise, we will never truly transform analysis, collection, collaboration, information sharing. And so we need to figure out how to, as a community, collaborate on solutions rather than solving each of the solutions separately. And then wondering why they don't interoperate and then spend untold amount of money trying to make them integrate. I know many of you have been watching very closely the director's 100-day plan, and I'm sure that he'll report out to you some of that tomorrow night. And I'm for sure I don't want any of you to tell him that I stole his thunder, so I'm going to let him talk about that. But in that and the subsequent plans that we've got rolling out, he's got us focused on some of the underpinnings that will help us solve things more collaboratively as a community. And so when you look under transform collection and analysis, you'll see some elements about how we develop A-space, LNI, all of those kinds of elements, and you'll see them printed out in your program. Those are good acronyms to learn because they will be real. Some of them are real right now. The discussion of if somebody won't let me have access to this information or that database or whatever, we're in fact addressing that in terms of dissemination and processes to expand dissemination of sensitive information across the community. To include 24/7 processes for those tactical things in nature that are time dominant, and the longer organizational sharing of things that are dominated by process. I have a feeling you'll see in the subsequent plan that comes out a big emphasis on certification and accreditation, which many of you know I've been working on for over a year. I've just signed the deal earlier this year with John Grimes, the CIO of DoD, that says that we will settle on the following 7 changes associated with certification and accreditation principles, and are working out the details for the words that will actually show up in Intel and DoD policy. But there's an underlying element of that, and the underlying element of that is that certification and accreditation is not solely a security equation. And in fact, certification and accreditation is a balance of many things, of which security is but one recommendation, not determination. Things like mission, things like risk, things like cost, all of those things are important when you're in the certification accreditation business. And in the past, I believe we've been target fixated on saying that it was pretty much a security process. It is not. It is a mission process, which has to get input from across the entire community, not just one part of our community. And so I'm absolutely positive you'll see those things. And I'm sure that the boss will talk through the elements of where we are in terms of the 100-day plan and the actions that are going to follow on after that. My name's Dale Meyerrose, and I'm ready to take your questions. Okay, first question. Strategic plan is the wrong term. Okay? I've been chided. Better stated, do we have a strategic vision that can be used to tie the many complex efforts described herein and elsewhere under the banner of D&I together? The answer is yes. Okay, you'll find them in the following documents. For the community writ large, there's a National Intelligence Strategy, which we've not lost sight of. If you're looking for IT in particular, on the 19th of December last year, I signed out the strategic intent for IT for the intelligence community. And it's been out there, and it is still current, it is still relevant, and it covers many of the things and more of the elements that have been part of this. Okay, so that was that question. Okay, how will the CIOs of the agencies be encouraged to buy into the vision? Let me introduce you to Guido Jr. First of all, over the course of the past year and a half, we've worked very hard to communicate and work with each other as the group of CIOs. We meet regularly on a monthly basis. And in fact, we spend time in each of those sessions sharing solutions, and we'll do this problem, you take that problem kind of idea. But more so than that, we are finding out more and more that many of the CIOs were trying to solve some of these situations on a bilateral basis, and it took very little effort to change that from a bilateral between two agencies to being multilateral to include all the agencies. And so we have several efforts that are associated with those kinds of things. And in fact, the deliverables that we had in accelerating information sharing from the 100-day plan were elements all brought together under the rubric of the CIOs collectively. And the deliverables that we're looking for the next year and a half follow the same pattern. Additionally, we've been given an additional tool that some of you are probably aware of. In February, Director McConnell, as one of the first documents he assigned, designated me as the information sharing executive for the intelligence community. And in turn, directed me to form the Information Sharing Steering Committee, which has a deputy from each of the agencies participate. And out of the 16, only 2 of them are CIOs. The rest of the folks that participate in the Information Sharing Committee, in fact, are policy people or deputies of those organizations. So we have those things of collaboration working for us to encourage CIOs and agencies to work together. We got 2 other tools at our disposal. One ought to be really obvious, and that is every national intelligence program dollar comes through the D&I. And so that's how people get paid. And so it behooves us to understand, why the money is being given and what's being done with it. And the last tool I'll talk on is, again, something that may not be obvious to everybody, but we do have a Director of National Intelligence Inspector General. I always find it amazing how people's attitudes change when somebody comes, advises them of their rights. Of course, we've never done that. But the idea that says that we do have oversight functions and authorities within the Director of National Intelligence is an important differentiation to prior to IRPTA of 2004. How often will the agencies be evaluated in their progress towards vision? There must be a CIO out there asking these kinds of questions every day. No, it's again, there's not a stock answer there. Some of those are program by program, but always we try and aggregate those to make sure that we're not making finite one-off decisions that in fact don't lead to a greater vision. And so in my mind, the mechanism that we've used over the past 100 days, if you will, were the deliverables, which came out over the course of the past 8 weeks or so as benchmarks to how well we were doing. What is the Community Forum for Collaborating on IT Solutions and Tools? That is a very good question. And in fact, that's a question we hope to sort out under something that you're going to hear called the single information exchange environment. We have already several agency forums that folks send people to on a routine basis. We have one for enterprise architecture. We also have one for data. We have one for PKI, which we generated to solve a particular issue and problem. And so that is one of those areas where we will continually remake ourselves in figuring out better ways to how we make collective solutions applicable to everybody. How do you draw on business process as defined by other parts of the D&I or agencies to drive D&I CIO initiatives? Well, let me sort of turn the question on its head. If I don't have either the business process or the mission process from the other elements of the D&I or the community writ large, then I become nothing more than a self-licking ice cream cone. The business of fielding new IT technology for the sake of fielding new IT technology because it's there does not seem very productive nor a very good use of taxpayer money. And so you find us wrapped very, very tightly in the elements of what many from using the OMB nomenclature of E-lines of business. We work E-lines of business within the intelligence community. And the element of how closely we work together between us and analysis and working things like Library of National Intelligence, A-Space, Catalyst, all of those, ICARs, all of those kinds of things is evidence that our reason for being in the CIO is in fact to support other folks. I had a question off here to the left.
Oh, thank you. Before I ask my question, I was just very curious to see how many in here are currently working as analysts. My question is, I'm just wondering how much, if analysts are being urged to collaborate across agencies and industry is being urged to develop integrating systems, can industry design those systems without the input of analysts? Can analysts collaborate using tools designed without their needs having been taken into account? And I'm wondering, what is the plan for how these two groups can talk to one another, assuming that a lot of people in industry may have been analysts before, but as the whole process is changing, there's a lot that you need people who are currently analysts.
Sure. Very, very good question, and again, there's a myriad of answers. I'll give you some concrete examples. Most of the elements we've been talking about here today about transforming analysis have user groups. The things for which I'm program manager for on behalf of the community, we have user groups that are a part of the process of not only evaluation but the business of design and creation. And when I say design and creation, I don't mean milestone 1, milestone 2. I mean the design as this is a concept development and here's a practical way of working through it. So we have a series of those. And in the larger context, if you think about it, the Deputy Director for Analysis, in essence, represents all the analysts in the community. And they have the burden of making sure that connection back to what is relevant to analysts today and what will be relevant to analysts tomorrow is very much a part of the responsibility that I know they share and work very seriously. Which is why some of the elements, some of the underpinnings that we're putting in with regard to joint duty become very, very important. Joint duty, again, the concept that says that if you rise very far within the intelligence community, you have to be broader than just a single agency in order to continue to progress in any one tradecraft or career field. Okay, I'll take one more question. How is the partnership with DoD CIO bearing fruit? And I'll end with this. As many of you know, for the last year and a half, I worked very hard with the DoD CIO, John Grimes. He and I are longtime friends, and we were very conscious of the rift or perceived rift in the past between the intel community and DoD. And he came on board about the same time I did, and we made the pledge that we would work very hard to make sure that there was no daylight between us. Now, John uses the phrase joined at the hip. That's a little close for me, so I'm just comfortable with no daylight between us. And in fact, over the course year and a half, we've signed almost a half a dozen agreements between DoD and the intelligence community on a variety of subjects. All the way from working information sharing for allies on classified networks, to agreeing to a certification accreditation construct, to creating a unified cross-domain management office, to the point of we're going to adopt DoD enterprise service standards. They're going to adopt intelligence community search and discovery standards. And the list goes on. And in fact, we have several still in the works of how we can work more closely together. It's no secret that a large majority of people in the intelligence community also call the Department of Defense home. And so the degree that we can leverage each other, reduce workload, increase effectiveness, and reduce redundancy, needless redundancy and cost, I think is an inherent responsibility that both he and I share, feel, and are pledged to support. And that is probably one of the most key relationships that I believe that we have. And as a temporary steward of that relationship, I intend to do everything that I can to make sure that, that there's no daylight between us. So with that, I'm Dale Meyerrose, and thank you for your time.